Let me tell you something strange about people who need to prove their worth in everything they do. We live in a world that celebrates confidence, ease, and effortless success. Maybe you're one of them, and maybe no one has ever explained why you carry this invisible weight on your shoulders every single day. If you want to understand what you feel without labels and have the language to explain yourself without justifying your existence, subscribe. Here we translate psychology into relief, not diagnosis. We speak about what lives beneath the surface, in the spaces where worthiness and exhaustion meet. This isn't about fixing you. It's about finally seeing yourself clearly. The world calls this perfectionism or insecurity. But what if it's the opposite? What if this relentless need to prove yourself is actually a form of deep conscientiousness, an internal compass that refuses mediocrity, a quiet rebellion against invisibility? What if it's not weakness at all, but the residue of someone who learned early that love and belonging weren't given freely? They had to be earned again and again with evidence. There are virtues hidden inside this exhaustion. Sensibility sharp enough to notice what others miss, a work ethic that borders on sacred, an ability to push through discomfort that most people will never understand. It's not just anxiety, it's also devotion to craft, to integrity, to being more than just present. It's the refusal to take up space without justification, and in a world drowning in mediocrity and self-promotion, maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe it's a forgotten form of dignity. We live in a culture that rewards the opposite. A world where confidence is currency, where presence equals performance, where you're told to just exist and stop trying so hard. But maybe the real noise is that, the pressure to show up casually, as if your place in the world were guaranteed from birth, as if you didn't have to prove anything. For some people, that was never an option. Somewhere along the way, they learned that worth isn't inherent, it's conditional. That approval comes with receipts. That love is a transaction, and the price is always your best effort. So they became performers in their own lives, rehearsing every email, perfecting every task, afraid that one slip would confirm what they secretly fear, that they don't belong here at all. This isn't just social pressure, it's deeper. Psychologists call it a fragile self-concept, when your sense of value depends entirely on external validation and measurable success. It's the opposite of intrinsic worth. Every achievement becomes proof you deserve to exist. Every failure becomes evidence that you don't. The stakes are never just about the task. They're about survival. And the cruelest part? The world doesn't see it. They see ambition, drive, dedication. They don't see the exhaustion underneath. They don't see someone running on a treadmill with no finish line, where rest feels like erasure and stopping feels like disappearing. They don't see the weight of performing your right to be here every single day, with no promise that it will ever be enough. Psychologists call this achievement-based self-worth. It's when your value system becomes inseparable from productivity and performance. In other words, you don't just do things, you do them to prove you're allowed to take up space. It's a conditional existence. You're only as good as your last success. This often begins in childhood. Maybe love felt earned, not given. Maybe praise only came with perfect grades or visible effort. Maybe there was neglect dressed as high standards, or attention only granted when you were useful. So you learned the equation early: worth equals output, silence equals rejection, rest equals risk. And you've been solving that equation ever since, in every job, every relationship, every room you walk into. It's not laziness you fear, it's irrelevance. It's the terror that if you stop proving yourself, people will finally see the truth, that you were never supposed to be here in the first place, that you've been faking it all along, that your seat at the table was a mistake, so you work harder, you prepare more, you check and double-check, not because you love perfection, but because you're terrified of being exposed as insufficient. In other words, it's knowing you exist, but never quite believing you're allowed to. It's living with a permission slip you have to renew daily. It's exhausting, and it's also a form of hypervigilance, constant monitoring of your own value, scanning for proof that you're still acceptable, still deserving, still enough. It's not ambition, it's self-preservation disguised as productivity, but of course not all of this comes from strength. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's trauma dressed as motivation. Sometimes it's the voice of someone who once made you feel small, and you've been trying to prove them wrong ever since. And that's okay, because even fear is a form of care. Even proving yourself is a way of protecting the child inside you who never felt safe just being. There's a shadow side to this, the burnout, the resentment when your effort goes unnoticed, the collapse that comes after years of running, the relationships you lose because you can't stop performing long enough to be present, the quiet rage at people who seem to exist effortlessly without needing to justify their space, the envy of those who were born believing they mattered without receipts. And then there's the loneliness, because no one sees the full picture. They see your success and assume you're fine. They see your competence and think you're confident. They don't see the panic before every meeting, the rehearsing, the sleepless nights replaying every mistake. They don't see you checking your phone for validation, measuring your worth in likes and responses, and whether anyone noticed your effort. They don't see the emptiness that follows every achievement, the moment you realize it still wasn't enough. This isn't about blaming anyone, it's about naming what's true. You're not broken, you're adapting to a wound. And sometimes the wound runs so deep that even success can't fill it. Sometimes the only thing that helps is recognizing that the game was rigged from the start, that no amount of proof will ever satisfy a question that should never have been asked in the first place. Do I deserve to exist? Needing to prove your worth isn't rigidity, it's survival architecture. Speaking less isn't coldness, it's self-protection when your words have been used against you. Working harder than everyone else isn't obsession, it's the tax you pay for permission to stay. And maybe that's not fair, but it's also not weakness. It's what happens when worthiness becomes a daily exam you never stop taking. This doesn't mean you're doomed, it means you're aware. And awareness is the first crack in the armor. Because once you see the pattern, once you notice that you're constantly auditioning for a role you've already been cast in, you can start to ask a different question. Not, how do I prove I'm enough? But who told me I wasn't? Not, what do I need to achieve? But what would it feel like to stop performing and just be? There's something almost sacred in this exhaustion. A refusal to be mediocre. A commitment to integrity that runs so deep you'd rather burn out than half-ass anything. It's not healthy, but it's also not nothing. It's the mark of someone who cares. Maybe too much, maybe in the wrong direction, but who cares nonetheless. And in a world full of people phoning it in, maybe that matters. Resting isn't giving up, it's remembering you're human. Doing less isn't laziness. It's reclaiming your right to exist without a resume. Being ordinary isn't failure, it's freedom. And maybe, just maybe, you've been extraordinary long enough. Maybe it's time to find out who you are when no one's keeping score. A person like this once tried to embrace the just be yourself advice everyone offers so freely. They showed up without preparation, without the usual armor of overachievement, and they felt naked, exposed. Like they were waiting for someone to ask why they were there, what gave them the right to exist in that space without credentials. The anxiety was unbearable, so they went back to what felt safe, proving, performing, perfecting. But then something shifted. Maybe it was burnout that finally broke through the denial. Maybe it was a moment of clarity in the middle of the night, staring at another finished project that brought no satisfaction. Maybe someone loved them without needing a reason, and it confused them so deeply they had to sit with it. Whatever it was, they began to question the premise. Not am I doing enough, but why do I believe I have to? Studies show that people with achievement-based self-worth are more likely to experience anxiety, depression, and chronic stress, but also greater persistence and resilience in the face of failure. The gift and the curse live in the same house, but the most beautiful thing isn't the research. It's when someone finally realizes that the question itself is violence. That asking, "Do I deserve to exist?" is like asking, "Does the sky deserve to be blue?" It's not even a valid question. It's just what is. This isn't about becoming lazy or giving up standards. It's about recognizing that your worth was never on trial. That you've been answering a question no one with good intentions would ever ask. That maybe, just maybe, you've been enough this whole time, and the only thing left to prove is that you're willing to stop proving. So what does integration look like? It's not about never achieving again. It's about untangling achievement from identity. It's learning to say, "I work hard because I care about my craft, not because I'm afraid of disappearing." It's recognizing the difference between doing something well and doing something to survive. You can start by noticing the moment the proving begins. When you're about to send that email, ask yourself, am I improving this because it matters, or because I'm terrified of judgment? When you're redoing work that's already good enough, pause and ask, who am I trying to convince? When you feel the urge to list your accomplishments in casual conversation, notice it. Not to shame yourself, but to see the pattern, to catch yourself mid-performance and remember you're allowed to just be here. Here's language you can use with yourself and others. I've spent a long time believing I had to earn my place. I'm learning that's not true. You don't owe anyone an explanation for resting. You don't need to justify taking up space. You're not a guest in your own life waiting for permission to stay. You're here because you're here. That's it. That's the whole reason. This is self-compassion, not self-indulgence. It's the radical act of treating yourself like someone who belongs, even when you don't feel like you do. It's practicing existence without a performance review. And yes, it will feel uncomfortable at first. It will feel like falling. But maybe that's because you've been holding yourself up for so long. You forgot what it feels like to be held by something bigger than achievement, to be held by the simple fact of being alive. Not every effort is compensation. Sometimes work is just work. Sometimes achievement is just joy. But when every single thing you do carries the weight of your right to exist, it stops being about the thing itself. It becomes about survival. And survival is exhausting in a way success never fixes. Maybe the real work isn't proving your worth. It's grieving the fact that you ever had to. Grieving the childhood where love felt conditional. Grieving the relationships where you were valued for what you did, not who you were. Grieving all the years you spent performing when you should have been resting. That grief is holy. It's the beginning of freedom. There's a kind of quiet rebellion in stopping, in doing something badly and surviving it, in showing up without credentials and noticing that the world doesn't end, in letting someone see you tired, unpolished, ordinary, and discovering they don't leave. In realizing that the people who only loved your achievements never loved you at all, and that's information, not failure. And here's the truth that no one tells you. You will lose some people when you stop performing. Some relationships were built entirely on your usefulness, your productivity, your willingness to be smaller than you are. When you start taking up space without apologizing, without earning it, without performing, some people won't know what to do with you. And that's not a reason to go back. That's confirmation that you're finally free. Not all absence is emptiness. Sometimes it's the place where the soul remembers it doesn't need permission to breathe. And maybe needing to prove your worth isn't ambition. It's the scar tissue of someone who was taught that love is a transaction. But scars can soften. Patterns can break. And you can learn to exist without an audience, without applause, without proof. What if you stopped trying to earn what was always yours? What if your worth wasn't in question? It was never even up for debate. What if the exhaustion you feel isn't because you're not doing enough, but because you're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist? You are not a case to be made. You're not evidence of anything. You're a person. And that's enough. It always was. So here's the question that might change everything. What part of you has been performing your entire life, and what would it feel like to finally let them rest? Not forever, not in all things, just for a moment, just long enough to remember what it's like to exist without needing a reason. To be here, not because you've earned it, but because you're alive. And that's the only proof that ever mattered. If this video gave you words for what you've always felt, if it named the weight you've been carrying without knowing why, subscribe. Here we talk about what the world never knew how to name, but you've always felt. We don't teach you how to be better. We remind you that you were never broken, just tired. And maybe that's all you needed to hear. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes with this. It's not the loneliness of being alone. It's the loneliness of being surrounded by people who see your accomplishments but never see you. They celebrate what you do, never who you are. And after a while, you start to wonder if there's a difference anymore. If maybe you've become nothing but your resume, your productivity, your usefulness. If the person underneath all that effort even exists anymore. You sit in rooms full of praise and feel empty. Because the praise is never for you, it's for the performance. It's for the version of you that worked 60 hours this week, that said yes when you wanted to say no, that smiled through exhaustion and called it dedication. The version that knows how to be impressive. But what about the version that's tired? What about the version that wants to cry or rest or admit they don't have it all figured out? That version never gets invited to the table, and so you split yourself in two. There's the public you, polished, competent, always ready with the right answer. And then there's the private you, the one who's terrified, who second-guesses everything, who feels like a fraud, even after success. The one who lies awake replaying conversations, analyzing whether you said too much or not enough, whether you proved yourself or revealed too much weakness. The one who knows that all this effort is a house of cards, and one mistake could bring it all down. The exhaustion isn't just physical, it's existential. It's the tiredness that comes from never being off duty, never being allowed to be human without consequence. It's the bone-deep fatigue of someone who's been their own harshest employer for years, decades maybe, with no vacation time and no retirement plan. And the worst part, you can't even complain about it, because from the outside, you look like you're winning. From the outside, you look like you have it all together. And maybe that's the loneliest part of all. Here's what nobody tells you about healing from this. It's not a straight line, and it doesn't happen because you finally achieved enough to feel safe. It happens in small moments of rebellion. The day you send an email without reading it 17 times. The afternoon you say, "I don't know," in a meeting without following it up with 3 paragraphs of justification. The evening you let yourself be mediocre at something and survive the discomfort of it. It happens when you start to notice the thoughts. If I don't do this perfectly, they'll see I don't belong here. And instead of obeying that thought, you get curious about it. Where did it come from? Who taught you that belonging was conditional? What evidence do you actually have that one mistake would erase your worth? And when you can't find any real evidence, just old fears dressed up as facts, something starts to shift. Recovery looks like learning to tolerate your own ordinariness. Not because you are ordinary, but because you're finally allowing yourself to be human. It's the practice of doing something at 70% and noticing that the world doesn't end, that people don't leave, that your value doesn't evaporate. It's scary at first, like stepping off a cliff. But then you realize you were never as high up as you thought. You were just exhausted from climbing. And sometimes healing looks like anger, righteous, clarifying anger at the people and systems that taught you your worth was negotiable. Anger at the parent who only smiled when you brought home perfect grades. Anger at the workplace that normalized 60-hour weeks. Anger at the culture that told you rest was laziness and boundaries were selfishness. That anger isn't ugly. It's your soul finally standing up for the child you were, the one who should never have had to audition for love. Let yourself feel it. It's the fuel that helps you stop performing and start living.